This is a knife, but it's not just any old knife. This knife has been forged with Meteorite Damascus. Now this meteorite is as old as time itself. And that's not all, as later you'll see me put lots of yellow gold in the handle. Now this meteorite comes from a previous project where I created a sword using a chunk of the Gibbeon Meteorite stacked in a layer of 1084 steels and 15 and 20 steels. That project left me with some offcuts, and that's what I'll be making the knife out of today. I'm really excited, and without any further ado, let's light the forge and start working on this amazing project. So let's do it. Now while the forge heats up, I'm going to go ahead and start to prep my steel. So I'm going to take these offcuts and I'm going to clean the scale off of them. This will get me clean surfaces that'll forge weld properly. After this, I'm going to use some acetone to wipe them down before I use a MIG welder to tack it on both ends to hold it while I forge weld it. My first goal is to get the pieces welded together so I have more mass that I can then twist later on for my pattern. Alright, so now we've got our billet welded together. You'll notice that there's quite sizable gaps, which is less than ideal. Something I advocate for a lot is fluxless welding, where you basically have it so there's no gaps and you weld all the seams. That's the best way to do it. Because of how organic these pieces are, I'm going to be taking some borax to act as a flux. We're basically going to heat this up to forge welding temps, sprinkle this in, and that'll dissolve the forge scale by creating a boron glass. It's a chemical stuff, but yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get this in the forge, and yeah, hopefully it'll weld. Let's see how it goes. What I'm essentially doing is closing up that gap, and the explosions you're hearing is actually borax shooting out of the billet, as well as the borax that's been caked up on my anvil shoots out as well, an explosive kind of slurry. It's super cold during the forging process, however, the majority of the third-degree burns on my arms are from this process. Now that the billet feels pretty consolidated, I'm going to go ahead and prepare it for twisting. I do this by octagonalizing the piece of steel. This essentially rounds over all the corners, and what that does is prevent cold shuts later on when I twist it. Now, I chose Twist Damascus as it's one of the most organic patterns that you can get, and I've recently kind of had a sweet spot for organic patterns specifically, and that's kind of what the driving force was to do this, especially with meteorite in it. Basically what I'm doing is I got one side twisted really tight. Well, the other side's a little bit thicker than the other, so I need to now flip it around, heat that side up a bit more, and twist it again. That way it evens itself out, so we don't end up with this really wonky pattern. So, see how it goes.
Now I'm going to heat it back up.
Alright, so we got our billet nice and forge welded. Now, before I move any further though, I want to stop and grind off cold shuts. Cold shuts are where the steel folded over on itself and it didn't weld. I tried to use some borax and get them out during forging. That didn't really go to plan, and so instead I'm just going to take the time to let it cool down, go to the grinder and remove them after the fact to get down to a nice clean piece of steel before I try to forge out a blade. So that's what's next. Hey, I'm actually really happy with how much steel we have. This is actually really, really cool. It's where it twisted off the end of the billet. I'm gonna actually take this and grind the surface and etch it at some point, and maybe I'll make like a pendant out of it. But that's gonna be twisted Damascus, which will look super pretty. I just realized, I think it's been like, quite literally like 2 years since I have used this ferrochloride. Really, since I went to college, I stopped doing a lot of like fancy mosaics or complex Damascus knives. Oh my goodness, that is just pure goodness right there. You see how tight of a pattern that is? So that little bright streak in there is some meteorite in the core of the piece of steel we used. I'm excited to forge a blade out of it. Speaking of forging a blade...
Just kidding. We gotta grind it first.
So you can see here these cracks. Those are what are called delaminations that I've been talking about. And I need to grind those out before I go on with forging.
Sorry.
Oh, doggone it. No, just kidding.
Sorry.
It's time to forge the blade. Something that is massively important is I'm working this at a very high temperature. If you start to work this temperamental steel at a lower temperature, it'll split on you. So forging is completely done. It's nice and straight, but now we have to go ahead and soften it because as you forge, you work hard to seal. So I'm going to go ahead and heat it up to the critical temperature 3 times, let it cool down. That way we're all prepped and primed, ready to go in for a quench. Because if I didn't do that, chances are it would look like a snake when I quenched it. It might still look like a snake when I don't know. We're going to find out. So before it starts raining, I'm going to go ahead and anneal this blade.
So I actually screwed up there when I was talking to the camera, but what I meant was we're going to normalize the blade. And we're going to do this by heating the blade first up to just above the critical temperature. In my case, it's just above 1500 degrees, so I'm aiming for around 1600. The next time, we're going to go down to critical temperature, which is the temperature that you quench at. And then for the final time, I will take it just below that to around 1400 degrees. And that'll help me to have a really nice grain structure going in for the quench.
It's time to quench! Woo! Now we gotta get it clamped. Try to keep it straight. She's hard. Arr. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and profile it on the grinder and scratch off the scale so we can temper it. Because with a blade this thin, I know I'm going to break it if I don't temper it very soon. So let's do that.
Alright, so the blade has been ground up to about an 80 grit finish. Now I'm going to work on to polishing, and I'm going to start and try to save myself some time hand sanding by using a 120 grit belt and then some Scotch-Brite belts to basically smooth things over. That way when I go to hand sand I don't have as much work to get my deep 80 grit grooves out. So it'll soon be time to etch the blade, and then we can see the amazing meteorite pattern that this thing has got. Yeah. Alright, so the blade has been hand sanded up to final grit before I'm going to etch it. I'm not going to etch it yet, as I'm probably going to end up ruining it in the processes of making the handle, so I'm going to wait on that. So what I'm going to do next is take this piece of African blackwood, and the problem I have with it is it's not quite thick enough in this dimension. So I'm going to knock off the corners to get me a little bit more width. Once I do that, I'm going to segment it in two pieces. The reason I'm going to do that is so the top piece I can fit up tight to the base of the blade without any gaps. Then I'm going to have a gold spacer, and then below that I'll fit up the rest of the handle how I usually would. So let's go ahead, knock off those corners, and yeah, start fitting it up to the base of the handle. Oh yeah. About right. That's where the gold spacer will go. Alright, so something you're going to see me do here is that now that it's been fitted up to the shoulders of the knife, I'm actually going to take a high-speed burr and actually recess the shoulders into the piece of wood. This will get a really nice fit, and while I've done this on sword guard fit-ups, I've never actually done it on a chef knife, so this was a first for me. So we got the handle nice and fitted. There's going to be a spacer that's going to have 14 karat gold on it wrapped around in here, but I'm going to shape it without that, and then we'll add that in later. But for right now though, I'm just going to go ahead and basically give it a nice sort of a sketch. So now I can go ahead and start to rough in that profile. So that's what we're going to do next.
It's not straight. I gotta fix it. It has a little bit of a kind of, the handle kind of sways to one side and you get this sort of almost rainbow effect the whole way down across it. Alright, so the handle has been completely fitted up. It's all nice and straight now. So now I'm going to take some files, go in there and basically contour out the spots that I wasn't confident on the grinder bit. So then we're going to go ahead and polish it out. You know, part of the reason I was so excited about this project is just because it gives me a chance to sort of showcase the skill set that I have at the current moment. And so I hope that, you know, 5-10 years down the road, Lord willing, as long as I've continued to improve, I can look back at this video and sort of, you know, just be proud of how far, you know, God and His grace has taken me in the craft and what I'm able to do in that time. So it's currently at 1,000 grit. I still have a bunch of carving to do. And now this is going to fit. Yeah, the next step is to make this spacer and then also carve out this fancy inlay portion on the pommel. So let's do that. There's gotta be a better way of doing it. Oh, I broke my pencil head. Alright, so what you're seeing me do is roll down some gold stock that I had into a usable piece of wire that I can then veneer the spacer that I'm using. I'm using a copper spacer and I'm making the outside portion solid gold. That way it doesn't rub off like a plating would, but at the same time you're not making the entire spacer that you won't even see out of solid gold. Now that that's been sorted, remember that time I said I was going to etch the blade? Well, let's go ahead and etch it and coffee stain it. After the blade's been coffee etched, we're going to go ahead and carve the handle. Now it's time to add gold. Let's do it. This is honestly one of the most terrifying steps of this entire build, and there's a lot of things that could go wrong, but there's also a really good thing that could go right. So I'm really hoping that I don't screw everything up that I've done up to this point, and that the gold goes in smoothly and just looks absolutely stunning. So, okay, so upon further review, I really don't like how the gold foil looks. It just kind of feels cheap and almost like I painted a sort of gold paint in there, and I don't really,
I don't think that it's a fitting kind of end to this project. So instead I'm going to be using some gold sheet that is 32 gauge sheet of 14 karat yellow gold, solid gold, and going to be inlaying that into it. It's much thicker and much more expensive, but I'm just so pumped to see how it looks. So thank you guys for coming along on this journey with me, and let's go ahead and show the finished knife. Bye. God bless.